AI Mentors is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting and networking needs. Our podcast, AI Mentors, hosted by Mark Kelly, brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI Mentors cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career.
Today's guest on the AI Mentors show is Justin Fortier. Justin is a principal data scientist for ViralGains. Justin is an AI, machine learning and data science executive who's more than 20 years of experience developing actionable insights to deliver profitable growth for several industry leaders. In the show, Justin will tell us about why he loves about his job, how to add value to your business using data science, and make the move from working in academia into industry. Later, we'll offer advice on how to make the most of your data science career. You're listening to the AI Mentors podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly. Today's guest is Justin Fortier. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So Justin, tell us a little about your background and how you got into the world of data science and AI.
Sure. So I was math and business undergrad, and I've always kind of enjoyed, applying math to solve business problems. So I was doing this long before they called it AI or even data science. It was, advanced analytics, and it was statistical analysis and things like that. But I've always enjoyed that. And it was just sort of a natural progression for me to transition that into predictive modeling and now deep learning and AI. So.
And why do you think you chose a career in that field? Was there anything particular that kind of drove you to that?
Yeah, I remember one moment in particular. I was working at Staples, their headquarters, about 10 years ago, and we were working with an outside consulting firm that was doing some regression work for us, and I was managing the customer satisfaction survey program for retail. So for all their stores, everything from designing the questionnaire to predicting what are the top drivers of satisfaction, and then training the development agents out in the field on, if you do one or two of these key things in terms of behavior changes, you'll move the needle on your customer satisfaction from X to Y, and now you'll be a platinum instead of a gold and that kind of thing. So that's when I was like, this is some really cool stuff, and I enjoyed the theory behind it, but more the application of it, and watching them get excited about how, if you figure out what are these one or two things that can really move the needle, you don't have to focus on the other 100 things that you might have been wasting your time on, and so it's great. So that was sort of basic linear regression, and that's kind of how I got started in all this stuff. And then since then, I've just sort of been obsessed with it, and I've taken dozens of courses online, and largely self-taught, but there's a lot of really great stuff out there that's available. So,
and tell us about what you're currently doing at the moment, Justin.
Yeah, so currently I'm a principal data scientist at an advertising technology company in downtown Boston called ViralGains. And essentially, ad tech is sort of the engine behind the digital advertising space. So when you open a browser and an ad pops up, whether it be like a display ad or a video ad from a large brand like a Toyota, JetBlue, something like that, we're sort of the ones behind the scene that decide, do we want to bid on that ad space to show you a video? How much do we want to bid? And then if we win, which of these 5 videos from our different clients should we show you first? And, that's all AI behind the scenes, figuring out, the likelihood that you'll watch each of those videos if we show it to you.
Brilliant.
And our clients want us to, they all have different goals, but essentially, they want us to get people that are most likely to view their videos, click on the call to action, go to the website, and ultimately make a purchase and deliver revenue. So.
Fantastic. Tell us about what you love about your job in the whole world of AI and data science.
Yeah, I love it because, in terms of AI and data science, it's just such a rapidly growing field, and there's just so much to learn all the time. And, I'm in a bunch of different, groups, and I go to meetups, and I'm taking courses and all that stuff in my own limited time, free time. But I just love learning, and there's always exciting stuff to learn in this field. And but I also love giving back, and that's why, to the extent that I've learned some lessons over the years, I like opportunities like this to, talk back. There's a lot of junior data scientists that are trying to get started, and I've had the opportunity to speak at some conferences, and I love talking to them after, and I can learn from them, and maybe they can learn a few things from me as well.
Yeah, and I think it's that mentor and actually just helping people get their first step to the ladder just to be so helpful. Even everybody now is just learning from each other because there's so many things changing at any one time. Tell us about the journey to actually making value from data science and some of the important skills that you need to have, and maybe the mindset that's involved too.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways I'm probably a little different than some data scientists, Mark, is that I have an MBA, right? So I didn't, I majored in math undergrad with a business minor, but then and I worked for many years. I've worked in several different industries, so I've always kind of been in the business world as opposed to like the PhD academic route. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I decided to go back and get my MBA, and that's because I was at a point in my career where I realized, maybe you're building great models, you're doing great work, but it's not being seen by the right people, and it's not driving business value, and that's frustrating, because you feel like it should be. And then I realized that, the soft skills are more important than the technical skills, actually, right? And those are things that aren't necessarily taught really well in school, even at the graduate level. So that's why I decided to go back and get my MBA. That helped me a lot in terms of, thinking about the customer first, framing it as a business problem, and then solving it with AI rather than saying, I have this great neural network, what can I use it to solve? That was sort of the backwards thinking that I was doing. And I think a lot of people might do that as well. It's not like you start with if AI is the hammer, is one of the analogies I love, it's not like you have this great hammer and you're trying to figure out what nail to hit with it. It's more like you have a nail, and what are you going to use to solve that business problem? And it might be a complex neural network or support vector machine. It might be a simple linear regression or logistic regression. So don't get so fascinated with sort of the sexiness of it that you forget the basics of solving the problem. And then the other thing is the communication. So the great thing about business school is you have a lot of group work. You have a lot of chances to sort of learn how to influence without authority. And that's invaluable in the business world. And you also do a lot of presentations. So, the communication, I mean, I think half the job, honestly, is a sales job. And by that, I mean selling yourself, right? So selling the need for data science, it might sound obvious because, you hear it's the sexiest job of the 21st century, all this stuff. But, in reality, a lot of the business world is just starting to really explore this stuff. And, they're not all convinced that they need it. And a lot of businesses have been very successful for a long time without any machine learning or AI. So it's your job to sort of convince them that you could make them even better if they use these techniques. But it's all about the business. It's all about starting with the business and then getting buy-in, creating an experiment for like a quick win, hopefully, and then you can sort of iterate and expand from there.
So having a kind of understanding the problem that you're trying to solve, being able to influence key decision makers, being able to actively communicate, because you're trying to look for sponsors at any one time, but these people might not necessarily be ready for their data science message to actually go on that journey. Even though they feel like they are, they might necessarily be, because they kind of see the results they've got in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the pros and cons of different domains from your experience?
One of the things that, not necessarily on by design, but I've had the chance to work in a lot of different domains. So I started in insurance, then I went to food services, then I went to retail, and then I went to software as a service for small businesses. Then I went to scientific manufacturing, and now I'm in advertising technology. So, I've also had the chance to work for some big companies with several thousand employees, as well as, some startups with 50 or fewer employees. So I think that's another, I think that might even be a bigger difference than the industry is the size of the company. But, everybody has data, right? Everybody has customers, and everybody's looking for somebody that can find patterns in the data and make recommendations to the business that are going to drive the bottom line, right? But what's different is, based on the size of the company, there might be more layers of approval that you have to get, right? So, in a startup, you might be meeting regularly with the executives and you might have their ear, and it's not always easy to sell something, but it's a lot easier and faster than if you're in a company with, there's 8 layers between you and the CEO, and, getting approval from your boss and then from their boss and then from their boss, each takes a month. by then the model that you've built isn't even really valid anymore, right? So that's some of the frustration I've had in the past, working for really big companies. And that's kind of what I like about the startup life that I'm in now is, things happen quickly. And I like that because I think what's most fulfilling about the job is seeing the impact that your work is having on the business. Nobody cares about, what your area under the curve is or your, however else you want to look at a model, your accuracy, your precision, your recall. That's something that only people within data science really care about. What the business cares about is, what was your percent lift in viewership or, your percent decrease in cost for, test versus control, where the test used AI and the control was sort of using the status quo.
So it's data driven. So you're actually really looking at the results, and it's kind of day zero every day, right? So you're actually just trying to justify that case and kind of lead with the benefit and lead with the actual data too.
Yeah.
What kind of?
Sorry, let me just say, I was going to say one more thing about that, and that is the different domains all have a different language, right? So, I'm sure you've seen the Venn diagrams for data scientists where it's like you have you need the computer programming skills and you need the statistical background and you need the business understanding, the domain expertise. And that's the part that varies so much by industry, right? So, for one example, I was working at Staples and the products are pretty easy to understand, right? It's binders, it's pens, it's, maybe a chair or something like that. But then I worked for a huge scientific company where, I was building a recommendation system and the output was if you bought this chemical that's, 27 letters long, you'll likely to be interested in this other chemical that's 37 letters long. And I had to work with a subject matter expert who was a chemist within the company and say, does this even make sense? Like I know the model says people that buy this will likely buy this, but before I make this recommendation and have egg on my face, does this even make sense, right? Maybe people are buying both because they're bundled together or because they're very similar products. So that's the kind of stuff that everywhere you learn that's a different industry has a whole different language.
So that's the kind of spurious correlation. Just like Nicolas Cage's movies in July versus the amount of people that drink drive in, a certain state at certain times. Like these correlations can be perfect depending on what way you want to have them, but they don't necessarily tell the whole story. And a lot of people say you can kind of get the metrics you want at a certain level of data if you try hard enough.
Sure, absolutely.
In certain ways too. And what advice would you offer to people kind of making the move from academia to industry? And I know yours is probably a little bit different because you went and got the MBA. Any particular advice that you kind of noticed from hiring those people in data science and building up AI teams?
Yeah, I think, one thing I've noticed, trying to hire data scientists for my teams the last, few years is it's really hard to find somebody with data science experience that also has a good amount of business experience and business acumen. I think a lot of people are coming from it, from an academic perspective, super bright. They might have a PhD in statistics or even some colleges now have masters or PhDs in data science specifically, which certainly didn't exist when I was, in college. But again, it all comes back to business, right? I think if you can show, not necessarily that, you build really accurate models, but what did those models do, right? So when I'm looking at a resume, I want to see examples of numbers and that have driven specific business metrics. So for example, I built a let's say, for example, I built a classification, a churn model, that helped reduce churn in our company by 15% over a 6-month period. And that saved the company, $22 million in lost revenue, right? Something like that. I mean, that's what really impresses me. And that's what I think most people in the business world would say is, give me specific examples of how you've driven business value. So, now, I understand if you're just coming out of college, you might not have had a lot of experience to do that, but to whatever extent you can do something like that, I would highlight it.
Yeah, so being really, really specific, show the return on investment, show why you did it, and that it actually matters and it takes it into consideration. To any other advice that you'd offer to aspiring data scientists or people who are now in the field, but maybe feeling a little bit not as motivated as they once were going into it, because maybe a bit disillusioned because of the data janitor type work and kind of getting the data ready and fit for purpose, which can be quite a difficult challenge to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mark. I think the job of being a data scientist, at least my experience, can be very different from the hype, right? I think, it certainly is fun. I love it. I love being able to think creatively and add value to the business and work with different stakeholders and executives to solve problems. But yeah, 80% of your time is going to be spent, doing sort of the unsexy work of, cleaning the data and, imputing the null values and transforming variables and deriving new variables and things like that. And, you just kind of have to understand that that's part of it, right? But I think what I would say is the reward at the end is great, and it's worth it. I have met some young junior data scientists who've come in and they expect that, it's going to be all glory, from day one. And, that's just not really the case. But as long as you're willing to do the work and ask good questions and understand the process, and as long as you're in a company that supports that and understands that and gives you the time to do it correctly, then I think it'll be worth it at the end.
And just the one thing that's really become apparent when I'm just researching your background and speaking with you is the amount of insight that you had to the data, and then coming up with some impact that's going to make the business better in some different way. How important is it defining the right problems and defining the right questions to figure out those problems? And how do you actually go about that journey of kind of think time, rather than kind of jumping into the solution or trying to apply these complex models, rather than necessarily have the data fit for purpose? And questions to me are so important to kind of figure out. So I'd love to get your insight on that, Justin.
Yeah, sure. So two things come to mind when you ask me that question, right? One is there's a million business problems that could be solved using data science or AI, but given the size of your team and, you need to come up with a roadmap, right? So by that, I mean, in next quarter, next 6 months, next year, these are the top priorities that we're trying to solve. These are the top customer pain points or business problems that we're trying to solve. And then we'll figure out exactly which algorithms to use later to do that, right? But start with the business problem, because you can spend a lot of time going down the wrong path and building this perfect model that solves the absolute wrong problem. And that's not something you want to do. It's not good for your career. And it's just very frustrating, right? So I think if you start with the right problem, you think about it in terms of a roadmap, in terms of the business first, you hone in on one or two things that you want to solve first, and don't think so much initially about the details or the type of model, but just the business problem. Then later on, you go back and you figure out how you're going to do it. But if you don't start with the right problem, it's bound to fail. The other thing I would say is, in terms of a specific target variable, right? So, one of the mistakes I made in my career is I built this great model at a company, and I thought it was fabulously successful the way I was defining it, and other people thought it failed, right? And it's because at the beginning we didn't agree on how success was going to be defined, right? So an example would be we want to add revenue, right? Well, are you talking about percentage growth versus last year? Are you talking about percentage growth this month versus last month? What if there's seasonality in your business? Are you talking about dollar revenue growth? Are you talking about overall revenue for the company or just for specific divisions? Those are just a few examples of things that you really need to nail that down and get buy-in from all the executive sponsors ahead of time, because otherwise you're solving the wrong problem.
So clarify. Do not assume anything, and
exactly.
Be fixated on the problem you're solving, the questions you do to gather that, because once you've got that, it kind of is like the Abraham Lincoln. If I had 4 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 3 hours sharpening my axe.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's worth it because, while that might not be the sexy part, we all just want to dive into the modeling. Again, if you don't do that properly at the beginning, it's doomed to fail. You don't want that.
Fantastic. You're listening to the AI Mentors podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly. I'm speaking to Justin Fortier, who's a principal data scientist at ViralGains. Justin, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mark.
Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.